The 2014 Atlanta Press Club Louder Milk Young Debate Series, brought to you by Georgia Public Broadcasting. The Republican race for the United States Senate.
Good evening. I'm John Pruitt, journalist and retired anchor for Channel 2 Action News in Atlanta. We'd like to welcome our viewers and our live studio audience to the Atlanta Press Club Louder Milk Young Debate series, which is originating from the Georgia Public Broadcasting Studios here in Atlanta. Now, this is the debate involving the Republican candidates in Georgia's U.S. Senate race. So let's meet the candidates now, and I'll introduce them in alphabetical order. Paul Broun of Athens is the congressman from Georgia's 10th district. He was elected in 2007. Arthur Gardner, a patent attorney from Cobb County and an antique car enthusiast. Phil Gingrey of Marietta is the congressman from Georgia's 11th district. He was elected in 2003. Derrick Grayson of Atlanta is a minister and MARTA senior network engineer. Karen Handel of Roswell is a former Georgia Secretary of State and former Senior Vice President for Public Policy at Susan G. Komen for the Cure. Jack Kingston of Savannah is a congressman from Georgia's coastal 1st Congressional District. He was elected in 1993. And David Perdue of Sea Island is a businessman who served as CEO of Dollar General and Reebok. And now our panel of journalists. Jim Galloway, veteran political reporter and columnist for the Political Insider for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Nwande Lawson is coordinating producer at Georgia Public Broadcasting and the owner of Rev Productions. And John Sherrick, who's covered news and politics for WXIA 11 Live in Atlanta for decades. So now let's get started. In the first round, each candidate's going to be asked one question by one of our panelists. The candidates have 60 seconds to answer the question, and Nwande Lawson gets the first question now for Derrick Grayson.
Mr. Grayson, you were recently criticized about a decision to visit Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who we know was gained some notoriety around his stance against the Bureau of Land Management, and also for remarks that he made indicating that African Americans were better off in slavery. I'm wondering about why you think it's important to offer your support to Mr. Bundy.
People, particularly in the press, and I've made videos where I have stated on several occasions that race matters only to us because the press forces it to matter to us. Doesn't really matter to those in D.C. The more important issue that's being ignored as it relates to Mr. Bundy's case is the fact that the government was violating his constitutional protections. And for me, what I cannot understand is why we would pick something else. Well, I do understand why the press would, but for American citizens, if we understand what our Constitution is about and we see the danger of government overreach, there is no way that we can allow ourselves to continue to allow the government to do what they have been doing, because the moment we do that, nobody will be free in this country. People, if they are racist, let them be racist. They aren't going anywhere. Aside from that, let us protect our constitutional protections.
Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Now the next question from Jim Galloway for Jack Kingston.
Mr. Kingston, when Democrats attack Mitt Romney and other wealthy Republicans, the reply often is that they are engaging in class warfare and demonizing success. You have accused one of your rivals, David Perdue, of chewing up businesses. You have jabbed him for living in a wealthy Sea Island community. Are you engaging in class warfare, and are you demonizing his success?
Well, just as my record as a member of Congress is scrutinized by all the voters, as it should be, I think someone's business record is relevant. And in this case, my friend is telling everyone I can fix the problems in Washington, and yet, as CEO of Pillowtex, he bankrupted the company. He was only there 9 months and received $1 million bonus on his way out the door. I think that's relevant. Those 8,000 people will be coming out of the woodwork, probably to run ads for the Democrats if he is the nominee. I think it's relevant. Just as I have to stand and defend my record, so should everyone else up here, whether they come from the private sector or the public sector.
Mr. Perdue, you were the object of that answer. Let's have some rebuttal. Please,
well,
briefly, if you can.
Thank you. Well, first of all, this is what we've come to be accustomed to in politics, Jim. I'm an outsider. I've never run for office before, but Congressman Kingston knows full well that Pilatex was already in bankruptcy when I was hired. It's a tragedy. It's a manifestation, though, of decades of bad government policy that decimated multiple industries: footwear, apparel, textiles, furniture, electronics, all across this country. I was a person that ran to a burning building to try to help, and that's exactly what I did there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Perdue. Next question now, John Schierick for Karen Handel.
Policy question for you that's important to a lot of people. You have said that if you were the GOP nominee, you would not let the Democrats' nominee accuse you of waging some sort of GOP war on women. An issue that's front and center before the American people right now is gender pay gap. Women making less than men in the workforce for doing the same job. There's a measure before Congress right now, I think it's called the Paycheck Fairness Act. Democrats are pushing it. Republicans are saying it doesn't really do anything that federal law doesn't cover already. Is this an issue for the federal government to tell business people, private business people, what they should pay their employees? And if so, how would you handle it in the Senate?
It's absolutely not an issue that the federal government should be engaged in mandating to employers what to pay. And in fact, I find it ironic that the liberals and the Democrats are pushing it, given the fact that when pushed, President Obama himself had to concede that he had a little bit of disparity within his own ranks. And it had to do with the very real issues of experience, length of time in a particular job, and many other factors that really do contribute to what the salary is. You know, I think that what's really important is getting this economy going again in a robust way. And the way that we do that is through the conservative principles of lower taxes and less regulation, because we don't want to build out an economy on minimum wage jobs and mandate businesses to the point that we're stagnating job growth, because we want people to be able to have good quality, stable jobs, the kind of job that they have the security and enough money so that when that car breaks down, they're not having to choose between fixing the car and keeping a roof over their head.
Thank you, Ms. Handel. Next question now from Nwande for David Perdue.
So, Mr. Perdue, in response to a mailer from the Kingston campaign that accused you of being a supporter of President Obama's rollout and implementation of the Common Core educational standards, you, in part, your office countered that this wouldn't be the case because your parents, in fact, are both public school teachers. And I'm wondering, in what way do you tie your growing up in a household with public school teaching parents and the views that you have on Common Core standards?
Well, thank you, Nwande. I'll answer that question, but first, if you'll permit me, I'd like to, you mentioned my mother, I'd like to wish her a happy Mother's Day today, on Mother's Day, as well as my wife and all the other mothers out there. You know, I was raised in a household of two public teachers. One of my first jobs was in a Head Start program, and I grew up listening to local control every night at the dinner table. You know, what's happened in this country with regard to Common Core, in my opinion, it needs to be abandoned, and here's why. It's a distraction around the real crisis. Today, we have many kids who are not getting out of high school. Our 14-year-olds are not competing internationally in math and science, and we're not teaching kids to read. And the problem is that we have devastated generations of kids right now that are disaffected. That's why I got in this race. I think we have to have a fresh perspective from an outsider to break the logjam of spending all the money pushing it to the federal government, and we need to push it back to local control where the best decisions are made by the parent, the teacher, and the local administrators. I think if we want different results, we just have to send a different type of person to Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Perdue. Now, Jim has a question for Arthur Gardner.
Mr. Gardner, when it comes to gay rights, you have charted a rather different course than many of your colleagues on the stage. You have advised Attorney General Sam Olens not to defend a federal lawsuit challenging Georgia's constitutional ban on gay marriage. Surely you can't believe that a majority of Republican primary voters share your opinion. What's your point?
Well, when we say the Pledge of Allegiance, it concludes with liberty and justice for all. And I believe in liberty and justice for all. Not for some, not for most, not for the people that look like I look like or that act like I look like, but for all. And that includes gay Americans. So first and foremost, they're Americans, they have rights, and I feel duty-bound as a lawyer to push for equality. So that's, I start from that basis. And more important, or just as important, our party needs to win elections. And we need to draw back to the Republican Party women, young people, and gays. And our policies that we've been pursuing have been pushing away large blocks of voters. And we can't afford that. We need to win We need to win a lot of victories, including here in Georgia and across the country. And to do that, we've got to get off of these hard right social positions.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Now it's John Sherrick's turn to ask Phil Gingrey a question.
There are a lot of important issues to talk about, but there's a campaign matter that has come up in the last few weeks, an ad that targets you, accusing you of saying, I'm up here in Washington, stuck up here making $172,000 a year. And I know you were speaking in terms of an issue that is important to a lot of people. Maybe you were quoted out of context or misquoted, but what does that say about a member of Congress who might have that sort of attitude toward public service?
John, my attitude toward that is that I would work as a member of Congress proudly for no pay. And I'm in my 11th and a half year, my sixth term. That question came up in the context of members of Congress because of a ruling that President Obama made to the Office of Personnel Management. He basically said, because it says in Obamacare that members of Congress and their senior staff can no longer be in the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan, they have to get in the Washington, D.C. exchange. And oh, by the way, we're going to let them take their supplement, which is 65 to 70% with them, even though their salary, certainly that $172,000 salary of the member, and most of those senior staffers also are not eligible for that supplement. I was making a point that they should not get that supplement when I made that statement.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gingrey. Final question in this round now. Nwandi's question for Paul Broun.
I'm wondering, considering that Georgia has such great economic impact as a result of the agriculture here in the state, and the fact that immigration reform has had so much gridlock in Congress, what do you feel a movement for you from the House of Representatives to the Senate might mean in terms of your ability to move the immigration reform issue along?
Well, until we secure our borders, nothing else matters. We can't fix anything. We've got a lot of problems. I used to farm. In fact, I was an active farmer. We've got the very best farmers in the nation right here in Georgia. And we need to let them have the employment opportunities to get people to come and dig their onions and dig their peanuts and pull their corn and things like that. But until we secure the borders, absolutely nothing else matters. We must secure our borders. We must absolutely start enforcing the laws. We've had 4 presidents that have refused to enforce the laws on the books. And until we do that, we're not going to fix anything. We've got a tremendous amount of problems in the legal immigration side as well as from the illegal side. But none of those problems can be fixed until we secure the borders, start enforcing the laws that are on the books. The only new law I would like to see is one that makes English the official language of America.
All right, thank you all. We move now to the next round. And in this second round, each candidate will ask one question to the opponent of their choice. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for rebuttal. So the first question now from Derrick Grayson to the opponent of your choice.
I'm going to start with Mr. Gingrey. Congressman Gingrey, in the final debate last night, you challenged everyone to state that they would repeal Obamacare or go home. My question to you, sir, and I'd like to ask it of the other 2 gentlemen that are in the House of Representatives, but my question is, when I challenged you to state that you would support, obey, protect 100% of the Constitution, 100% of the time, and if anybody on the stage did, I would vote for them if they became the nominee. Why didn't you?
Not sure I really understood the question, but let me say that it is clear, Mr. Grayson, it is clear that I have made an accountability pledge. I put skin in the game, and I have said to the people of Georgia that I will repeal Obamacare and replace it with something that truly does work, that truly does bring down the cost of care, of health care, while maintaining the quality, or indeed I will step out of the way and go home. And I would ask you also, Mr. Grayson, and the other members of this panel, to take the same pledge. You can stand up here and take a pledge of a term limit of 12 years or 6 years or whatever, but if you have no accountability in the game, you might as well be a potted plant in Washington. It is time for a United States Senator who says what he means and means what he says or gets out of the way. And I stand strong behind that pledge. It's the worst piece of legislation that has ever been passed in the history of this country.
Mr. Grayson, do you have a rebuttal?
That was not the answer. I pledged that I will fight to repeal Obamacare, but that wasn't the question. But I also pledged that I will obey 100% of the Constitution 100% of the time. And if I'm not willing to do that, I am not even worthy to serve the people of this great country where people, men and women, died to give us our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. That's the answer I was looking for.
What's that got to do with the Constitution, my pledge?
Right. Let's move on and keep on format. Next question now to the opponent of your choice, from Karen Handel.
Thank you. David, you know, throughout this campaign, you've said that you're an outsider who fixes things, and that makes a good commercial, but it's really a person's record that matters. So I'm wondering if you can tell us who the real David Perdue is. When you got an insider appointment to the Ports Authority, you think that people without a college degree aren't, or those who have lived outside of the U.S. can't handle complex issues. When Pillowtex went under, you got millions while thousands lost their jobs. This sounds a whole lot more to me like an out-of-touch elitist insider. So who is the real David Perdue?
Well, the real David Perdue grew up in Middle Georgia, the son of two teachers we've already talked about, and worked his way up through college, worked his way in the business world to become a leader in some of the largest companies in our country. We created tens of thousands of jobs in my career, and I'm very proud of that. We saved tens of thousands of jobs in my career. The question about the port specifically is they needed someone who had experience globally in the international free enterprise system. I looked at the needs of that port and I said, I'll volunteer and go do that. And you know what I found down there, Karen, is that we've been trying to dig in that river for 17 years to get approval to deepen that port. Now I just think that's a perfect example of how our government has misguided in its priorities. I mean, my goodness, we've been digging in that river since Oglethorpe. I just have a question for you about priorities. You know, when you were Secretary of State, Karen, it seems to me, I remember that in 08 and 09, you actually, on taxpayers' money, bought a luxury Lexus SUV while people were losing their jobs in Georgia.
All right, your rebuttal and answer to his question, if you so choose.
Thank you. I hope that should be his question, since he asked me a question when it was out of order. David, it doesn't take a college degree to figure out that with your record of sending jobs overseas at Hager, giving out thousands losing their jobs while you walked away with millions. You took millions in corporate welfare even as you've gone across the state railing against the debt, you contributed to it. I actually agree. Washington has enough of the out-of-touch elitists out there and establishment types. We do need a different kind of person in Washington. And I'm going to be a common sense conservative fighter, a senator for all Georgians.
All right, thank you. Jack Kingston, your turn to question an opponent of your choice.
Thank you, John. David, not to pile on here, but I do need to ask you, because again, all of our records are a matter of scrutiny for the voters. I know you lived in Massachusetts, I know you lived in Tennessee, and I know you moved to Georgia, I think in 09, but I can't see where you've ever voted in a Republican primary nor been active. I know in Massachusetts you gave money to Joe Moakley, a Democrat, very liberal congressman, but you have not voted in any Republican primaries that I know of, only in the presidential preference primary in 2012 and then in the general election. And as an activist conservative, wouldn't it seem impossible that how could you not vote in a Republican primary and be active in conservative causes?
You know, Congressman, thank you. I've spent my career in the real world. I'm not a career politician. And I'll tell you, I've spent my career dealing with the nonsense coming out of Washington. It's one of the reasons I got in this race. America's at a crossroads right now. We've lost our competitive edge thanks to 40 years of bad government policies that put our manufacturers at a definite disadvantage with the rest of the world. And it just seems to me it's time for a change. I really believe if we want different results in Washington, we have to send a different type of person. And I really would like to ask you the same question with regard to your frugality You know, in 3 years alone, you spent over $200 million of taxpayer money on 145 different earmarks. It doesn't sound like frugality to me, and that's part of the record that really counts.
Rebuttal, Mr. Kingston.
Well, let me say this. So I am correct, then you have not voted in a Republican primary, and I think that is extremely relevant to people who are looking at a conservative candidate and somebody who's been in the fight. And I've been in the fight, and you've been holding it against me. But I've been there, and you've been, listen, I'm not going to criticize moving around the country, but if you were a conservative, why were you not campaigning against Joe Moakley, the liberal Democrat in Massachusetts? Why were you not showing up to vote in Tennessee or even Georgia? You did not even vote for Saxby Chambliss.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question from Arthur Gardner.
This is a question for Congressman Brown. During the campaign, I've urged that it's dangerous for one's religious views to become law. Given that you have vowed that you won't pass legislation unless it comports with your view of the Bible, do you agree that one's personal religious views should not be the basis for law?
Lord, I'm a Bible-believing Christian. When I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior in my 40s, He changed my life. And I am a Bible-believing Christian. But I understand people have other beliefs than I do. But there's one thing we can all believe in, and that's that we've had the greatest country in the world, the greatest country in the history of mankind. Both parties are destroying the country with the policies of bigger spending, higher debt, more intrusion in our lives. All those are symptoms of a government that is totally out of control, become too big because we've left the constraints of the enumerated powers of the U.S. Constitution. That's what I stand firm on, is the U.S. Constitution. We've got to take powers away from the politicians and bureaucrats in Washington and send them back to the states or the people and leave dollars in people's pockets so they can run their lives without all the government intrusion. What I'm standing firm on is the Constitution as our founding fathers meant it. That's the way I voted, and that's the way I'll vote as a U.S. Senator.
Response, Mr. Gardner?
Well, of course, that really didn't answer the question the way that you have during the campaign. During the campaign, you have said that you're not going to pass legislation unless it comports with the Bible. And I disagree with that proposal. I'm a Christian of deep and abiding faith, but my faith should not be the basis for law over you, and I don't want your faith to be the basis for law over me. That sort of thought is very dangerous, and we should not go down that road.
All right, thank you. Phil Gingrey, you have the next question for an opponent of your choice.
Well, I'm going to direct my question to Congressman Jack Kingston. Jack, you've been running ads for months talking about your own personal frugality, that you're somewhat of a tightwad, yet you're a little bit loose with the other people's money. And being an appropriator, an earmarker for 20 years, I can understand some of that spending, but one thing I cannot understand is the $1 million earmark that you voted for and affected to restore Tybee Island beachfront property when you have property 500 feet from Tybee Island Beach. That's the kind of thing that I think a member of Congress should recuse themselves and not vote on that. Can you please explain that to me and also explain the fact that just a year before that, the Corps of Engineers put $9 million into that same project?
Phil, I'm a little embarrassed for you for asking that question. That project was authorized in 1964 or 5, not 100% sure, but I was 10 years old when that project was authorized. As you well know, or should know as a member of Congress, that beach renourishment is an ongoing Corps of Engineers federal interest because of flood control. The more sand you have in between you and the hurricane, the more that the property is protected. And that's why the federal government has a role in beach renourishment. And as you know, that's been going on a regular basis.
Rebuttal?
Well, Jack, you didn't vote in 1964. You voted in 2001 for that $1 million project. And as I say, you know, you had the property there. It's my rebuttal, Jack. You had the opportunity to vote no as an appropriator. And that's the reason the American people are so disgusted with members of Congress. That's why we have an 11% approval rating. This kind of crony capitalism, this shenanigans going on with earmarks has got to stop.
I know you'd like to respond, but we're going to stick to the format. It may come up again later. Paul Broun, your question for an opponent.
I'm frequently asked, Dr. Brown, what separates you from all the other candidates? Well, what separates me from all the other candidates is what this very thing is you hear what they say they will do. I've already done it. I've got a bill to repeal Obamacare, and it's the only one that keeps a federal bureaucrat from making health care decisions for anybody. I brought Georgia jobs. I started the process that brought Caterpillar here.
Can we get to the question, please?
You say they support the military. I'm in the military. In fact, I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2012, taking care of sick and injured Marines and soldiers.
Need a question for an opponent.
I'm going to pass on the question.
You're passing on the question?
I am indeed.
No question, no rebuttal, no response?
That's right.
All right. Very good. Your choice. That ends the second round. And now, I'm sorry. Forgive me, Mr. Perdue. You've been on so much, I just was about to skip right over you. But it's your turn, David Perdue, to ask a question of one of your opponents.
Thank you, John. I haven't been this popular since 8th grade. You know, Congressman Kingston, I respect you a lot. I like your family. You're a great family man. But you ran for Congress the first time in 1992. One of the reforms that you supported and proposed that first year was term limits. You're now serving your 11th term, your 22nd year, and wanting to serve at least 6 more years in the Senate. When you told the voters you supported term limits 20 years ago, exactly how many terms did you have in mind?
Well, David, I appreciate the question because, as you know, I'm the only one up here on this platform who has, in fact, voted for term limits and actually have co-sponsored 5 bills on term limits. I think one of the key things is that everybody jump in the water at the same time. Now, that's, I think, delivering on my promise, but I would have maybe a question for you. You say you're against the stimulus bill, but you have received on a corporate board on which you serve stimulus money. Now, which is it? Are you for stimulus or against stimulus? Because when you talk about it, you're against it. But when it comes time to receive it on a corporate board, you're okay with it. Shouldn't you be speaking out? Another thing, 2006, you've criticized the immigration bill, but in 2006, you served on a board which supported the Senate amnesty bill. But we hear you talking about that. So where are you on those issues?
Congressman, if you really believed in term limits, why are you still here? Career politicians. They say one thing, they do another, they obfuscate, they don't answer questions, they distract from the critical issues. That's what's wrong in Washington.
David, I answer that question, as you know.
Right. That's why I'll fight for term limits. With your help, we have a chance to do something really unusual in this election. We can retire 4 career politicians. So one of the reasons I got in here is to stop the inexcusable childish behavior in Washington.
All right, thank you. This does end the second round, and now we move to the third round. For those of you just joining us, this is the debate among the Republican candidates for Georgia's United States Senate race, and we'll now go into our third round. And in this final round, we'll have each panelist ask questions to the candidate of their choice until we run out of time. And I'll determine if a rebuttal is appropriate depending on the answer. So, John Sherrick, you have the first question.
Mr. Grayson, a lot of talk and debate is going on around the country about increasing the minimum wage. The minimum wage varies widely from state to state. Georgia's rock bottom among the states that have a minimum wage law. As a member of the Senate, would you push to increase the minimum wage?
Absolutely not. I just saw a post on my Facebook page where Seattle increased their minimum wage to $15, and I shared that photograph with a comment of say hello to the unemployment line and your new friends, higher prices. Government overreaches, and that is what is killing this country. It's obvious I really don't have a dog in this fight up here with these guys and Ms. Handel. My issue, along with most Americans, is that our constitutional protections are being violated by these individuals who operate in a silo. They overreach, They make decisions because they think they know better than us, when they really should just be getting out of our way and letting Americans get back to what Americans used to do: build things, make things, and find ways to innovate so that Americans can prosper without government interference.
Thank you very much. Next question from Nwandi.
Karen Handel, I'm wondering, you mentioned the need to create high-wage jobs as an answer to improving the economic standing here in the U.S. I'm wondering what you see as some concrete steps that could be taken in relationship between the federal government and the states to create these type of high-wage jobs and opportunities for many people.
Thank you. A couple of things. First and foremost, we have to restore the fiscal stability of this country, because if we're brought to our knees financially, then all bets are off there. Secondly, we need to have a re-energizing of this economy, and the way to do that is to have lower taxes. We have not had tax reform, real tax reform, in the United States in almost 30 years. Consequently, we have the highest corporate tax rate of any industrialized nation in the world. Add to that an extraordinarily onerous and expensive regulatory climate. Companies in the United States spend $1.8 trillion a year on regulatory compliance. We need to rewrite the tax code. I support a consumption tax like the fair tax, but staying with the status quo is unacceptable. When it comes to the regulatory climate and across-the-board audit, let's start in those places that have the largest footprint from a regulatory standpoint. EPA, and as well as banking and finance, which we got consequent to as a result of Dodd-Frank, and also a 10-year sunset rule for large regs.
Thank you very much. Jim Galloway, your question.
This question is for Mr. Perdue, but John, I'll let you decide if you want to spread it around a little bit. The issue of abortion is important in a Republican primary. Mr. Perdue, what is your definition of being pro-life? Does your opposition to abortion include exceptions for rape and incest?
Thank you, Jim. I was raised in Middle Georgia. I got the real deal values in Middle Georgia, and those are the values that have stuck with me my entire life. I am pro-life. I have a deeply felt personal conviction that we need to protect innocent life. And sometimes there's another innocent life, and that's the mother. And I also believe in the other two exceptions you mentioned. But these are the values that I'll go to Washington to defend, the values that I grew up with here in Georgia.
Jim, I will ask each candidate, please, to give a brief response to this question, which is so important to Republican voters. Mr. Kingston.
I'm pro-life, and I have a 100% lifetime voting record with the National Right to Life Committee.
Ms. Handel.
Exceptions for rape and incest?
Yes.
Thank you. I believe that abortion in any circumstance is morally wrong. However, as we work to really foster a pro-life culture in this country, having the exceptions lets us move forward in a way that we otherwise would not. There's only one person on this stage who has had to do battle with the pro-abortion forces. The rest have only had to check the boxes. I've been willing to stand up to fight for life, and that's the kind of unwavering conservative that we're going to need in the United States Senate.
Mr. Grayson.
I am pro-life and pro-choice. A woman has, and a man, have at least half a dozen choices to prevent a pregnancy. However, if a pregnancy occurs, they no longer have a choice. They have a responsibility to ensure that no harm is done to that child. I do not support exceptions for rape or incest. The only exception I would support is that of saving the life of the mother.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gingrey.
I am a pro-life OBGYN who's delivered 5,200 babies. I am staunchly pro-life, no exception for anything except to save the life of the mother. I believe in life from the moment of conception to the point of natural death.
Mr. Gardner.
This issue is a litmus test issue in the Republican Party and should not be. This is why the party drives away a lot of women and a lot of young people. We need to find a way past this issue. Personally, I'm pro-choice, not pro-life. So I'm pro-choice. But the reality is, until the Supreme Court changes its mind, the law is not going to change in any significant manner. And it is a waste of effort and counterproductive for the party to continue to focus on this issue as a litmus test.
Mr. Brown.
Very first bill I've introduced in every single Congress since I've been elected, a little over 6 years ago, was my Sanctity of Human Life Act that scientifically defines the beginning of life. And that's at fertilization. I'll fight to protect the lives of all children, born as well as unborn. And that's what I've been doing in Congress. And in fact, I've been fighting for their future too by trying to stop this out-of-control government that both parties have created. We're stealing our children's money. We're stealing their future, and it's got to stop, and both parties are guilty. And I'm fighting for our children.
Thank you very much. And now let's go to the next question from John Schierick.
Mr. Brown, if you were in the Senate, could you foresee any circumstance in which you would agree with President Obama? I'm thinking of the president's nominations, specifically the president's nomination of Michael Boggs of the Georgia Court of Appeals to serve on the federal bench in Atlanta. Would you vote for his nomination, for his confirmation, or against it, and why?
When I am in the U.S. Senate, of course, the confirmation process is a very important job of senators. And what I'll do is sit down with every potential nominee or every nominee for every potential position, whether it's a secretary or whether it's a judicial appointment. I believe in the Constitution as our founding fathers meant for it to be. When I was sworn in the U.S. Marine Corps, when I was sworn into the Congress, 5 times now in the military, 4 times in Congress, I swore to uphold the Constitution against enemies, both foreign and domestic. I take that oath very seriously, and I'll continue to fight for constitutionally limited government as our founding fathers meant for it to be. And I want judges who are going to stand by their oath of office because they take that same oath that I've taken in the military, that I've taken in Congress. I take that oath seriously. I want any nominee that comes before me to take that oath seriously also.
Thank you very much. Nwandi, your question.
Mr. Perdue, you've noted that the benefits of your serving the Senate would be that you're an outsider. I'm wondering, in your experience as a business executive, what are some of the roles that you've played that you think will make you very effective as a senator?
Well, you're taught in business to eliminate the noise and focus on the priorities. You just don't have time otherwise in a competitive free enterprise system to enter into years of debate like we see going on in Washington. You break the gridlock. But the misconception most people have is that a CEO of a large company gets everything he wants. It's just not the case. You learn to get consensus around critical issues. You offer up solutions and you lead people to the execution of the plan. I had stakeholders, employees, customers, investors, bondholders, bankers, analysts, and we had to balance the needs and wants of all those people. That's what I'll take to the U.S. Senate. There's a lot of common sense based on 40 years of experience of dealing with the nonsense and the gridlock that we've seen coming out of Washington. I just believe if we really want different results out of Washington, we just have to send a different type of person to Washington.
Next question now from Jim.
Mr. Kingston, you live on the coast. A new federal report, the National Climate Assessment, was released last week. It is the most detailed and U.S.-focused scientific report on global warming to date. Climate change, the report said, is responsible for rising sea levels, drought in the Southwest, heavier rain in the eastern United States, and more intense hurricanes and snowstorms. Do you accept that climate change is real and that it is caused by man's reliance on fossil fuels?
Actually, I believe that we as Republicans should not be afraid of science, but I think we should be very leery of the politics that surround the topic of climate change. Now, Jim, you and I are old enough to remember when Time magazine had on its cover in 1975, the coming ice age. And I would suggest to you that we have a lot of group thinking going on and that we shouldn't be afraid of pure science. Certainly I want clean air. Certainly I want clean water. In fact, I don't know anyone who doesn't, and we should all be very mindful of the environment. But if America decides to, say, close down its power plants the way the Obama administration is planning to do, but China doesn't and India doesn't, then you haven't accomplished much except for you have disarmed America economically. I believe, though, that we should look at clean energy, and that's why I support nuclear energy. I support the Keystone Pipeline. I support natural gas because I think that there are a lot of alternatives out there that we should be looking at.
Thank you. John Schierick, your question.
Well, springing for that, Mr. Gardner. Given the sometimes at odds concerns of the environment and energy independence, how would you vote on the Keystone Pipeline? Where do you fall on that?
I'm in favor of the Keystone Pipeline. We do need to monitor it, but it needs to go through. We need to be energy independent. We need to pursue all energy resources that we have available to us, because if we become truly energy independent, and we are on the path to that, then we can take a smaller role in conflicts in certain parts of the world, and it'll be great for our country.
All right, Nawanda, your question, please.
I was wondering, Phil Gingrey, if you could talk a little bit about the repeal of the Affordable Care Act as you see it, in that states have implemented it in different ways, and it has been rolled out, and there are, of course, consumers who are depending on the care that they're receiving now. What are the mechanisms for the repeal, as you see it, that would avoid having catastrophic circumstances for those who are using the insurance now?
Nawanda, this is, as I said, this bill is probably the worst piece of legislation that I've seen since I've been in Congress, and it needs to be repealed. It is not fulfilling any of the promises that the President made in regard to reducing the cost of health care for the average family of four of $2,500 a year. That's not happening. If you want your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your hospital, you can keep your hospital. None of those things are happening. So clearly we need to repeal and replace. Now, obviously, for us to get this done, we're going to have to not only elect Phil Gingrey, Dr. Gingrey, to the Senate from Georgia, but we're also going to have a net gain of 6 seats. And also in 2016, win the presidency, because we know the argument that President Obama the next 2 years will veto any legislation. But at that point in 2016, I'll have 4 more years to get this done. And I promise and pledge to the people of the state of Georgia that as a physician who has practiced 32 years, I will promise that I will fulfill this obligation, this accountability pledge.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question from Jim Galloway.
Ms. Handel, you've accused David Perdue of flip-flopping on the Second Amendment. I'm assuming that you're referencing the campus carry provision that was stripped out of legislation passed by the Georgia General Assembly this spring. Do you believe that concealed weapons should be allowed on public university campuses?
I do. I think that we need to be protecting our Second Amendment rights at all costs. The Second Amendment is not about people who are doing wrong. It's about individuals being able to have their rights to bear arms in this country. And I think that we need to have strong advocates for it and strong proponents who will stand up for the Second Amendment.
All right. Thank you very much. And that's all the time we have now for questions. Each candidate now will have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Candidates were chosen by random selection. And Arthur Gardner, you have the opportunity for the first closing statement.
Well, thank you. The other candidates on this stage will tell you that they are more conservative than I am. And they're right, but they just don't get it. We don't need the most conservative candidate. We need the candidate that can get the most votes. And we need a candidate that can appeal to the vast middle. Now, I was a mechanic for 10 years, an engineer for 5 years. I've been a patent lawyer for 26 years. I have a lifetime of problem solving and being in small business. I'm out to solve the budget problem. And I have a proposal to lower your health care costs that will knock your socks off. Now, the other candidates in this race are 3 congressmen, a convicted felon, a career politician who doesn't have a college education, and a businessman who says he's an outsider, but he's really an insider. The bottom line is, if you want a right-winger for your candidate, vote for somebody else, not me. But if you want a mainstream candidate that can appeal to the middle and beat Michelle Nunn, vote Art Gardner on May 20th.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Closing statement now from Paul Broun.
I agree for my nation. The policies of both parties are leading us down a track that's going to result in a total economic meltdown of our country. Both parties are guilty, and it's just got to stop. What I've been doing ever since I've been in Washington is trying to send powers back to the states or to the people, as the Constitution and the 10th Amendment says it should be, and leave dollars in people's pockets. What all the other candidates say that they will do, I have done. People can know where I'm going as their U.S. Senator because they can see where I've been as a congressman. I've got the bill to repeal Obamacare, and it's the only Republican bill that totally puts people in charge of their health care decisions. I've brought jobs to Georgia. I started the process that brought Caterpillar here, and I talked to Baxter Pharmaceuticals the same way. They all talk about strengthening the economy. My jobs bill would bring manufacturing back to America and would be a tremendous boost to our economy. They say that they support the Second Amendment. I'm the chairman of the Second Amendment Task Force. and they say that they're outsider. I made the ultimate outsider vote when I voted against John Boehner to be Speaker of the House. Vote for Paul Broun for U.S. Senate.
Thank you very much. Jack Kingston, your closing statement.
Thank you. There are some who believe that I should be running from being a fighter for the conservative cause. And I would ask, where have they been? You know, the National Journal has looked at the voting records and decided that I have the most conservative one of anyone running. The American Conservative Union has given me a lifetime voting record of 96%. And I'm the only one up here with an A+ from the NRA. National Federation of Independent Businesses has given me a 100% voting record. Author of the Fair Tax, John Linder, has endorsed me. Author of the Flat Tax, Steve Forbes, has endorsed me. Leading conservative journalist, Sean Hannity, has endorsed me. And I've also been endorsed by Herschel Walker. Very proud of that. But I've also been endorsed by the United States Chamber of Commerce because of my own personal background, growing a regional insurance agency into a large broker. And finally, I've been endorsed by the 1964 founder of the Republican Women of Clark County, my mother, on this Mother's Day, Ann Kingston. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil Gingrey, your closing statement.
Well, since this campaign begun, I have repeatedly stated that I am the most conservative Republican who can win in November. Now, the establishment in Washington, the insiders, they don't want Phil Gingrey to be the nominee. They want a more moderate Republican, someone that they control and that they can lead in their visions what they want the Republican Party to ultimately become. Somebody like uber-rich David Perdue, or someone like a 20-year appropriator like Jack Kingston, who for months has said he's saving people's money, but yet he's spending hours like it's going out of style. This is an election in which the people of Georgia have a clear choice. Either follow the elites in Washington and ask us to give up our traditional Georgia values, or vote for principle, integrity, and conviction. And I ask you, vote for Dr. Phil Gingrey for United States Senate. That's all the endorsement I want, the people of the state of Georgia.
Thank you very much. Derrick Grayson.
Next time, Art Gardner, say my name. It was 25 years ago, and I was pardoned, so I'm not a convicted felon. I just wanted to clear that up. There are a few things that are wrong with Washington that are easily fixable. Now, I don't call myself a conservative. Why? Because that's irrelevant if you are violating my constitutional protections. I believe in 100% of the Constitution, 100% of the time, and that is why we are in the shape that we're in. We have ineffective politicians who claim they are fighting for us, yet bad legislation continues to pass, like Obamacare. We have politicians who will not name names so that the American people can take out the trash. I want to empower you. I'm not looking for you to empower me. And then thirdly, we have got to get politicians that will name those names, stand on the Constitution, and understand that they are the servant, we are the masters. Thank you. I'm Derrick Grayson, Grayson2014.com.
David Perdue, your closing statement, please.
Thank you, John. Today, in the United States Senate, only about 10 people have any business experience, and yet 36 United States senators have been in elected office for over 30 years. In this race, we have 4 career politicians who have been in elected office for 63 years. Sometimes change does take an outside perspective, fresh eyes, determination, and a bucket load of common sense. That's what I'll take to the U.S. Senate. I think the decision in this race is really very simple. If you like what's going on in Washington, we have 4 perfectly good career politicians from which to choose. But if you're as fed up as I am with the size and scope of our government, the amount of money they take from our pockets, and with this childish, inexcusable behavior exhibited up there right now, I hope you'll give this outsider from Middle Georgia a chance. Fixing big problems is what I've done most of my life. If we want different results in Washington, we just simply have to send a different type of person to Washington. I'm David Perdue. I'm asking for your vote and your trust tonight. Thank you.
Karen Handel, you have the final closing statement.
Thank you very much, and happy Mother's Day to everyone. On May 20th, Republicans have 2 important considerations: who will be an effective, conservative United States Senator, and who is going to be able to beat Michelle Nunn. Now, we heard a lot of talk tonight, and it was just that. These congressmen have had every opportunity to do all they've talked about. And when it comes to the outsider, well, he's trying to buy this race. And I ask this, how can you trust someone to be a solid conservative when they've already flip-flopped on Common Core, campus carry, repealing Dodd-Frank, and talk out of both sides of their mouths on corporate welfare? I have a track record of actually getting the job done and putting conservative principles into place. We know the playbook that Democrats will run: income inequality and war on women. And that's why I've been endorsed by Sarah Palin, Eric Erickson, and conservative columnist Kyle Wingfield, because they know I'm the only conservative who can win. And yes, I am an unlikely candidate for United States Senate, and I'm proud, David and Art, of what I have overcome in the private sector and in elected office. I ask for your vote so I can take that tenacity and resolve to the United States Senate on behalf of Georgia. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. And that concludes our debate. I would like to remind voters that the primary elections will be held on Tuesday, May 20th, and early voting is already underway. Our thanks to the candidates and to the panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging tonight's debate. And there's more information about the Atlanta Press Club and all of the debates they will host this primary election season. And you may visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be in the archives there. We'll also let you know that this debate will be available on demand on gpb.org. The Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young debate series is made possible by donations from R. Charles Loudermilk. I'm John Pruitt. We do thank you for watching tonight. These Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young debate series. Please stay tuned now for a political roundtable discussion of tonight's debate up next on GPB's On the Story. Good night.